If you have stamps in your scrapbooking collection, then this is the video that you've been looking for. We're going to talk about lots of different ways that you can stretch your stamps to make creative scrapbook backgrounds. My name is Alice Bull. I run the membership community at scraphappy.org, and I'm also the host of the Scrap Happier podcast. But first, my friend Shu Wen from Shu Puff Creations has put together this hop, so I'm not the only person that will have ideas for you today with how to stretch your stamps. You'll find links to all of the creators in the description below this video. Let's start by talking about some different kinds of stamps. When you're creating backgrounds for your pages, you might be looking at background stamps. Now, background stamps are some of the larger stamps that you might have. They're usually some kind of design that's intended to sit behind a featured image. The one that I'm using here is the brushed stripe background stamp from Concord and Ninth. A lot of scrapbookers don't use background stamps specifically for scrapbook pages because they're really not designed in size-wise to fit very well on a scrapbook page. With most of our scrapbook pages being 12 by 12, and a lot of background stamps run 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 to fit card fronts, it just isn't the greatest size to use with scrapbooking. However, there are some really great ways that you can still use these with your scrapbooks, and I'm going to show you a great one with this stamp set. One of the great things about stamping is that you get to choose your own colors and decide exactly what colors need to go where. I stamped this with 4 different colors using inks from Concord and Ninth and Gina K Designs. And if you're looking closely, you'll see that I don't use the top and bottom parts of the stamp when I'm repeating those stripes in the middle. Those stripes have texture, and so you really want not to have the harsh lines from the top and bottom, so I only repeated sections from the center until I got to the top or the bottom of that strip. After tidying up the edge, I have the perfect piece of striped background paper for my page. Next, I'm going to play with one of the other stamps from that brush stripe background stamp set from Concord and Ninth. This one has little dashes, so I pull out a few different shades of green and I create a little strip of green dashes that I can use just to add accent to my page. It's kind of like creating my own cutoff strip from a pack of paper. In this next step, I'm going to create a mask that's going to go over a flower. So I basically just stamp the background of the flower piece and then I cut it out so that I can stick that over top of my regular stamps when I need to add things in behind the main part of the image. This is great when you want to layer your stamps, but you don't want to see through all of the layers. In this case, I'll be stamping my flowers and then I'm going to want to put some greenery in behind the flowers. So to do that, rather than trying to fussy cut 10 million flowers, which I would not enjoy, I do not love fussy cutting, I only have to cut out my one mask and then use that over and over and over again. The stamp set that I'm using is from Altenew. It's called Classic Beauty and it's a layered stamp. This rose actually has 4 different layers, so you can use 4 different colors, or you can use the same color and stamp over top. You can use different values of each color to add just the right amount of color and texture to your rose image. So I'm going to start this by stamping my rose background all over the page kind of randomly. I kind of look to see where the empty spots are. And honestly, I'm not too worried that it's not going to be too perfect. I really don't want it to be too perfect. That's one of the things that you kind of have to start loving when you stamp, knowing that sometimes things aren't going to work out well. Now, I always encourage you to work on a good flat surface so that you can get good texture. But one of the things I love about using clear stamps is that you can generally see if that clear stamp has made good contact with your paper. Now, if it hasn't released all of the ink really nicely, you can always kind of lift it up and press the back of that paper and really get that ink to come off from the stamp before you separate the stamp and the paper. If that makes sense, I'm hoping that makes sense. Now you'll notice that I don't actually cover the whole background paper here. I totally could, but I already knew that I was going to be putting that stripe paper, that strip of striped paper. Oh my gosh, isn't that a tongue twister? I'm going to be putting that down the left side of the paper, so I didn't bother stamping underneath it. It was just extra work, and I knew I could avoid that. Now, part of embracing the beauty of stamping means that it doesn't have to be just right. You may notice once you stamp something that things aren't exactly lined up, or you've left a bigger hole or a bigger gap somewhere that you're not very happy with. Some of my spacing on these wasn't really the best, but honestly, when I look at it now, and I look at that finished layout that I'm going to be showing you later, you're not going to notice that. And I'll show you some of the things that I've done here to kind of make that feel less apparent and less like a problem. One of the hardest things about using a layered stamp is to not only choose the right color palette, so I generally make a little practice sheet where I try a couple different color combinations so I can choose the best one, but I also find it somewhat difficult to sometimes line up the layers. However, one of the great things about being clear stamps is that you can definitely line them up a lot easier when you use clear stamps, especially if you take the time to kind of really see how those little layers are supposed to sit together. Once I found out how they were supposed to sit together, I would line it up kind of hovering over top before I would press down. I'd kind of start by pressing the bottom on and just laying the rest of the stamp down flat once it was actually lined up the way I wanted it to be. These layers I used Ballet Slipper from Concord and Ninth, Gina K's Innocent Pink, Concord and Ninth Grapefruit, and Concord and Ninth Honeysuckle. Now you can see all of the pieces that I've created so far. I've got the stripe piece, I've got the piece with the dash, and then I've got the floral piece. You'll notice with the florals that some of the flowers are kind of stamped right off the edge. It kind of makes it feel a lot more like a piece of actual pattern paper when you don't just keep all of the flowers completely on the paper. Now this looks totally fine and this would make a great background just as it is. However, you did see me make a mask. So now I'm going to use that mask to add a little extra dimension and interest to these florals. I'm just taking a rolled up piece of washi tape, putting it on the back of the mask, and now I'm going to place that right directly over top of one of the florals. You'll notice that when I cut the mask, I actually cut it really quite close to the edges. I'm not leaving a white line around the edges. I want this to be exactly the same dimension as that background of the stamp. These leaves are also a layered stamp, so there are 3 different layers for the leaves for this set. And so you're going to stamp the layer with one color or with one value of a color, and then you're going to stamp a little bit more detail and then a little bit more detail. Of course, you can skip right to the detailed layers. You can leave out the background layer. You can just use the background layer. Feel free to use your stamps in whatever way that feels right to you. If you don't want to have extra texture and detail, you can totally go with something that's a little bit more simple. Since we've seen layered stamping already in this video, I'm going to speed this section up. Now, if you're watching really closely, you will see that some of my masking is somewhat imperfect. Between that first floral and the leaves, there is a little bit of that white gap in between there. Now, that's not really the look that I was trying to achieve, but by the time I make this layout, honestly, when you're scrapbooking, you cover so much of your layout up with other details, with your photos, with your words, with your titles. There's so much more that goes on to this that when you have minor imperfections or parts that you really just don't like that much, it's not a big deal. So just trust me, there's ways of covering up the things that you just don't like that much. Another thing I'll point out, since we're friends, you may notice that some areas I've made the leafy sections a little bit bigger, and that was just to accommodate some of the spaces that I had left a little bit bigger in my placement of the florals. So now it's time to give you a sneak peek behind the scenes of what this page is actually going to be about. I was so fortunate to be able to go down to Park City, Utah a couple of years ago in 2019 with my friend Tracy, and we got to go to a Teresa Collins event. Actually, we went to two Teresa Collins events. They were hosted back to back, a Live Your Story event and a Create Your Story event. One of them is like a personal development and growth session or seminar with different speakers, and Teresa shares her story. She was so inspiring. And then we also did a Create Your Story event, which was all about creativity, scrapbooking, and getting our craft on. So between the two events, my cup was running over and I was so inspired. So this is a picture from that event, and I really hadn't scrapbooked it very well, so I wanted to make a page specifically about this. Looking at the page as it's coming together, I realized I needed another piece of pattern paper. So let's make another background paper. This one we're going to use a totally different technique, and I think you're really going to love it. I'm starting off by taping my cardstock down to my work surface. I actually use close to my heart smooth cardstock. I find that smooth cardstock when stamping is definitely the way to go. Close to my heart makes good stuff, and they sell it in bulk packs, which is even better. I grabbed my Innocent Pink ink from Gina K Designs, and I'm swiping the ink pad right down the whole strip of the paper. Some parts might be a little imperfect. You can see areas where the ink is thicker than other parts or thinner than other parts, where it kind of smeared a little bit at the bottom. It's really not a big deal. We're going for the overall effect here. Now you'll see I've pulled out a stencil here. This is the Swiss Dot stencil from the Crafters Workshop. Now we're not going to be using the stencil to do inking or anything through the stencil. We've got a fun idea for you here. Now, if you're worried about perfection and you're thinking, oh my gosh, stamping, it's just too stressful, then you're going to want to pay attention to this one. It's a really fun technique. I pulled out a stamp set from Altenew called Vintage Flowers. It has different sizes of flowers, and one of the flowers it has is super tiny. Now, if I'd asked you to create a polka dot paper using little tiny flower stamps, you probably would have looked at me and thought, oh gosh, no, please no. But this is just the easiest little cheating way to do it. So not only am I getting to use my stencil, but I'm also creating this perfect polka dot flower paper with the simplest technique ever. And ta-da, you peel off that stencil and you have this perfect polka dot background paper. Now, how cool was that? Now we'll take a quick peek at how this looks with the other papers that we've made from our own stamped background paper collection. For my next really fun stamped background idea, we're going to make a specialty piece. Now, I don't know how else to describe this, but I think magic is the best word. I cut a piece of 6x6 paper, and I'm going to pull out a stamp set called On the Diagonal Turnabout stamp from Concord and Ninth. These stamps are one part creativity and one part engineering genius, and I absolutely love them. This one's really cool because it makes a really cool diagonal background design. This is awesome for card making. I've also used them a lot in different kinds of scrapbook layouts. Now, I really do think that turnabout stamps are best done when you have a stamp platform. So I've pulled out my stamp platform that I have here. It's one that was released by Ranger a couple of years ago, and it does a really great job for me. So I'm happy to have it. It does come with a little guide to help you line up the stamp to get it in just the right spot. But once you've got it applied to your lid, that's the only time. You don't have to move the stamp once you've got it set up. So just do a good job lining it up, follow the guide, and then you'll be good. When you work with your stamp platform, just always make sure that your paper is pushed tightly into that corner. You're going to use your magnets to help secure the paper, but honestly, as long as you keep making sure every single time that your paper is pushed tightly into the corner, it works like a dream. So the way this will work is that we're going to ink up our stamp and stamp it over onto the paper. So I'm going to be using 4 different shades of green ink. I'm starting off with Concord and Ninth Sprout Color. I'll also be using Gina K Applemint, Gina K Lucky Clover, and Concord and Ninth Parsley. When I'm using a stamping platform, I often ink up my stamp at least twice to make sure I get really good ink coverage. Sometimes I even do it 3 times. If your stamps aren't holding ink very well, it could be that they're not conditioned. When they're brand new, they kind of have to be cleaned before you can even use them, and sometimes I'm really lazy and I don't always do that. The next step is to clean your stamp. So I like to use a stamp chamois. I have the Lawn Fawn stamp chamois and it works really great. Now you've stamped one layer and your next step is to do the second layer. So you're just going to take your paper and give it a quarter turn. And now put your magnets back on. Make sure it's pushed down into that bottom corner and grab your next color of ink. Now stamp your next color of ink on there just like you did the first one, and you're going to see how the two layers sit together. If you're having a hard time getting enough pressure on your stamping platform to get all of the ink off nice and even, then you might want to look at getting one of the tools. They're called a stamping pressure tool or something. They look like a giant air hockey controller kind of. Some of them are blinged up and really fancy, but basically it's something that you can hold in your hand a lot more ergonomically so that you can put even pressure on the lid of your stamping platform so that it transfers the ink better. Okay, time for step number 3. We're going to take our stamp chamois, clean off the stamp again, and then give our paper another quarter turn. Turn it the same direction. So I was turning mine counterclockwise. You can turn them clockwise. It really doesn't matter which way you turn it, as long as you're consistent in turning it the same way each time. And same thing for your 4th turn. So make your 4th turn, stamp it up, ink it up, and get that ink onto the paper. Now you're going to see here how all of the spaces get filled in by that last turn. All of the layers are really nicely mixed together. You have a little bit of that green in each of the spaces. I think that these are just amazing. This is not the only design of Turnabout stamp. Oh my goodness, they have so many creative ideas. I'm going to put a link to Concord and Ninth underneath this video in the description, so be sure to check out Concord and Ninth Turnabout stamps. They are one of my all-time favorite, most creative stamps that I've ever seen, and there are so many different looks that you can get with them, different ways to incorporate them into your scrapbooking. They're just a lot of fun. And that's it. That's the last little bit of stamping for this special background piece of paper. Yes, this paper is only 6x6, but it really doesn't take very long to do the stamping. You just stamp it and squish it down and stamp it and squish it down, and giving that quarter turn each time that you change colors. So let's take a quick look at all of the pieces that we've stamped so far, and then it's time to put this together like a layout. We have that striped border that has the multicolors. We have this cool Concord and Ninth Turnabout background, which is the perfect frame for this photo. We've got our background floral, and then we've got our little tiny polka dot floral as well. Oh, and I almost forgot the green dash strip. I'm going to start by cutting down the green Concord and Ninth Turnabout piece a little bit. I don't want to take too much off, obviously, because it's so beautiful, but I definitely don't need it to be quite as big as it is for the layout. One thing I noticed after trimming it down is that I still really missed having that white border, but I definitely needed the whole green part to be a little bit smaller. So after I cut the green part out, I actually added a small white border back to it again. Another easy step to do was to assemble the striped paper onto the floral background. The whole time I knew that the stripes were going to go down the left side of my page, so I just taped them down and taped that dashed line down as well. After matting the photo onto the green and then onto some white again, I knew it was going to go onto the small polka dot flower paper that I had made, but I thought I wanted it a little wider, and it turned out that later on I just changed my mind and I cut it down a little bit narrower. As long as I'm going from a bigger piece down to a smaller piece, there's no worries. It's when I'm looking at a small piece wishing that it was bigger that I ever have a problem. I decided to soften the layout a little bit. Those diagonal lines and the green are really quite strong, so I added a soft round doily in behind it to kind of just add a little bit of softness back to the page. I thought since I was having so much fun stamping on this page that I would use some alpha stamps to do my title. When I look at purchasing alpha stamps, they cost lots of money, right? So I want stamps that I'm not going to get bored of, that aren't going to be too trendy, but not very useful, ones that are going to stand the test of time. These ones here are called All the Letters Solid Stamp Set from Concord and Ninth. They're also available as an outline stamp set, and you can get matching dies as well. The title of my page is inspired, and because I only have one letter I fill out the word inspired the way I want it to be, and then I always take the letter from the middle, make sure I have the beginning so that things line up a lot better. So anytime you're spelling out a word, kind of lay out the letters that you need, steal them to fill them back in, but then always make sure that your first letter and last letter are actually there. It's so much easier to fill one spot in the middle than to try to fill one at the ends and try to judge and make sure you have enough space, or at least that's something that I've found over the years. I decided to make the title as an ombre with 3 different shades of green. So I start by doing the color that's going to go into the middle of the letter, and I just ink it up, and then I use my Lawn Fawn chamois to remove some of the color from the top and bottoms of each letter, and that seems to work really well. Definitely have to repeat it a couple times to make sure I have enough solid coverage in the center of each letter, but it works pretty good and it's pretty simple to do. And then you can just go back in and add a little color to the top and add a little color to the bottom, and it makes making an ombre title pretty simple. Whatever you do, don't forget to go back and add that letter back into the center of your word, though. You'll be super upset afterwards if you've taken everything down or put all of the inks away and then you have to pull it back out again. I just needed a couple little touches to finish the page off. I made some more rose leaves and then a rose to put near the photo for an embellishment. I added a stamp and I cut a piece of vellum to use for my journaling. So let's take a look at the finished page. I really love that by stamping my own custom backgrounds, I was able to create the perfect paper to scrapbook this photo of myself and my friend Tracy with Teresa Collins. I really feel that the inspiration that I have from making this page was very similar to the inspiration that I received that weekend through her classes, through her public speaking. It just left me with such a feeling of inspiration, and I hope that's what you got by watching this video today. I'd love to know which one of these techniques was your favorite, which one you can't wait to try, and maybe even which one you're a little bit scared of. I hope I've encouraged you to pull your stamps out and give them a shot on your scrapbook pages. Stretch those stamps and put them to work. Make yourself some beautiful backgrounds. And pop over to the other creators in this stamp hop, in this Stretch Your Stamp series from Shoe Puff Creations. Every single one of the creators, which are listed in the description below, will have a video out today to inspire you to get those stamps onto your scrapbook pages. And I'd love to invite you to come and get your own inspiration from Teresa Collins at the ScrapSmarter experience. This is an online virtual event that I'm hosting January 21st to 23rd of this year, 2022. And we have 10 scrapbook instructors. One of them is Shu Wen from Shoe Puff Creations, and along with Laura Wanzik, Sandy Reversky, Becky Adams, Christine Meyer, Jennifer Edwardson, Janet from RTS, Jenny McGarvey, Adam Westwood, and May Flom will all be teaching inspiring classes. So if you love learning some new scrapbooking skills, this is the time and this is the place. Pop over to scraphappy.org/SSE. You can use my coupon, Alice221, or Shu Wen's coupon, ShuWen221, to save $5. Let's learn some new scrappy skills. Happy scrapping!